Welcome, everyone. I'm Angelo Robles to the Angelo Robles Podcast. I'm also the founder and CEO at Family Office Association. I very much enjoy doing these interviews with amazing guests, and to give you some context from my perspective, where I'm coming from, and understanding both me and my organization, Family Office Association. I help global families and their family offices solve problems, procure positive future outcomes, and prepare for intergenerational necessity. It's vital for families and their family offices to understand their vulnerabilities and become more resilient so they can mitigate risk and prevail in times of crisis. My experience with some of the wealthiest families in the world has allowed me to distill best practices for discovering purpose and refining vision, governance structures, systems, processes, and culture that successful families and their safeguard family offices need in order to thrive. I help families create or reinvent their family office to be of institutional quality and highly adaptive. I've been very much for actually several months now looking forward to the two wonderful guests that we have today and being very curious in terms of what they do. And for sure, not only is it a good learning experience from entrepreneurship to much more, but the opportunity of understanding, because many of our families are active investors, how potentially they could be involved from sometimes a social perspective, because when you make a movie or a TV show, you potentially have a chance to send a message, for lack of a better word. And that's going to be very, very important to people, especially in today's times. And if you're investing, it wouldn't hurt if every now and then you could also make money. So I think there's going to be a lot of areas of interest to our people. So we're titling today, Meet the Executive Producer of The Lord of the Rings Trilogy. It features Mark Ordesky and Jane Fleming, co-founders of Court 5, formerly executives at New Line Cinema. Court 5 was founded, as noted, by former New Line Cinema executives Mark Ordesky and Jane Fleming. Court 5 is a multifaceted media company focused on developing and converting diverse intellectual property and brands into filmed entertainment for distribution in all media worldwide. Mark and Jane, welcome so much to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Great to be here.
Thank you. You're both very kind. It's really exciting to have you both on. We have so much to discuss, and I'm really excited. But from someone who thinks very fondly, back, my God, time goes by, about 20 years ago, to really such an iconic series of movies that became the trilogy after the great book, Lord of the Rings. And I would love to understand a little bit. So you were at New Line Cinema at that point. What goes into them deciding to move forward, not just one, two, but three movies in a different continent, multiple years in terms of the actors and yourself making a commitment? And we'll dive a little bit deeper into that. But if you could explain a little bit of the decision that I guess New Line Cinema made, who was, Mark, were you involved in that to do this, and kind of a little bit of some of the steps along the way?
You know what I think might be great, Jane, if we may take a half step back, because one of the things that Jane did when she was at New Line was architect the entire green light protocol process for the entire company, which included the process that we utilized to make the decision to do Lord of the Rings. And it's worth talking about a little bit because it ultimately informed that decision and really all the decisions that got made, and even the decisions we make today in our company. So Jane, maybe you could unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, and I'll make it quick because obviously the group on the phone is sophisticated from an economic analysis standpoint. But when I arrived at New Line in 1992, it was a public company that had done a lot of its film investing by the gut. And the company was ramping and becoming bigger. I think that the biggest movie that they had done, the biggest budget, was $12 million right when I first joined. And they generally knew what the movie needed to do in order to be a success for the studio. But they realized that as they were playing in deeper waters and raising more and more money, that they needed to be responsible to the bottom line. And we put together a green light process that took into account all of the distribution possibilities, the distribution revenue that the films could have, and we put it against budget and any other expenses, marketing expenses, et cetera, that we had. And we looked at if, how the performance of the piece would kick off fees for the studio, and to try to see whether or not on a ROI basis, as a singular investment, that movie worked. And I said singular because really at the end of the day, we didn't look at we didn't analyze movies and their greenlight potential only because of how that one movie would do. We looked at it across a slate of pictures. And we implemented this process, and creative people would come in with their projects. We would work with them to put together models, and then we would roll into the Greenlight Committee, which was, we always like to say, sort of like a gladiatorial process where you had the creative, the people that were going to advocate on behalf of why they thought creatively it should be made. And then we looked at it from the economic standpoint, and the winning combination was when they matched, obviously. So when you get to Lord of the Rings, and Mark can talk about it, Lord of the Rings was the right place, right time, right people kind of moment, which does happen in business, and I'll let Mark take it from there. But that was it.
And a little bit of context, everyone. We didn't necessarily have time, and rarely do, to read bios, and both Mark and Jane have incredibly extensive and rightfully earned. Jane has a significant background, not only at Princeton University, as I remember, but in multiple significant investment banking firms. So your background really was, and we're going to actually get a little bit about kind of what led you towards Hollywood, but it was in the world of finance. So you took something that was a little bit not as structured or rigorous in its process. That's probably the verbiage I was looking for. And so that's an incredibly valuable thing. You think studios would have been onto that years before that, but I know
they were starting to. It's interesting that the reason I got into the film, I'd always wanted to be in the film business, and I was very lucky to be an intern for Steve Ross, the late Steve Ross, who was the architect of everything we know as Warner Media now. I mean, he was Warner Communications at the time, and I was his intern. At the end of the summer, he said, look, I can send you out to Burbank and you'll be a dime a dozen. You're a young person with taste and an opinion. He said, but if you go and get finance experience, you're going to come in and be a double threat, because you will have skills that will become very important in our business as it evolves. He was a real visionary, Steve. And he saw that the business was turning into a conglomerate, sort of vertically integrated business. It wasn't just people making movies anymore. It was people that are making franchises, and that really to have some business experience would take me much further than just a person with good taste and an opinion. So I credit Steve for that. So I went off and did very earnestly go and get investment banking experience, and then was lucky enough to land at New Line Cinema in 1992, when the company was about to have a meteoric success. And there's nothing better than being a young person with bosses that believe in you and a company that's growing. And Mark and I both got to ride that. My first person I met, actually, who was on my Greenlight Committee, was Mark Ordesky in the entertainment business. So you never know where the world will take you.
And Mark, did it kind of start in terms of they need to make a decision to buy the rights to the book series? Was it kind of undervalued, or was it highly competitive?
It was not as simple as it's coming in the door as the books, but it was not remotely competitive. That was the irony of it.
Wow.
Peter Jackson had been developing the books of Lord of the Rings at what was then Miramax Films for 18 months, a very creatively contentious 18 months, where Miramax and Peter did not see entirely eye to eye on the creative vision as it was developing. They wanted to make one film of the three books. He wanted to make two films of the three books. Ultimately, New Line wanted to allow him to make three films of the three books. But what was most interesting, and this really goes to the heart of what Jane and I do, and it's not just in the creative businesses. I had known Peter Jackson and met him in the mid-'80s when he was making low-budget horror movies. And the knowledge of him and the friendship that I developed with him in that time, that was a full decade or more before Lord of the Rings was ever even a discussion point, meant that when he rolled into Los Angeles with a sort of a 3-week window to set up the film on terms that would allow it to be taken out of Miramax and taken anywhere else, a lot of places didn't even want to meet because they felt fantasy was a dangerous and weird genre. It had never really worked. Who was this guy from New Zealand? There was just no information. So a lot of people didn't take the opportunity as seriously as they should have. I'd been friends with him since the mid 80s, and I got into New Line in the late 80s and was talking about Peter Jackson relentlessly, just as an advocate and a fan. So by the time Peter rolled in, everyone at New Line knew who Peter Jackson was because I talked about him all the time. So, and there was one more factor we're talking about. New Line was at a corporate moment, which Jane can speak to also, where there was a corporate frustration that we couldn't make sequels to our big Jim Carrey franchises, The Mask and Dumb and Dumber. We'd made those films, but we were having trouble sequelizing them, which was a great frustration. And Bob Shea and Michael Lynn, who were the chairman and sort of founder of the company, realized that by making 3 films, we were essentially pre-making the sequels. That was sort of a very Hollywood way of looking at it, but nonetheless true. And so suddenly by doing that, the economies of scale you could bring to bear would be huge. So as risky as the investment was, there were all kinds of financial benefits by doing them all at once.
And something that a lot of people don't realize, New Line was set up in a way where we pre-sold all of our international rights to every movie we did. So we had a syndicate of partners around the world, independent distributors all around the world that would take risk with us. And so we had all these partners that had to buy into this investment with us. And they did. So really we had laid off, I would say 50% of the investment. Interestingly, when we got subsumed into, when Warner Brothers was sort of looking at New Line, they got very frustrated that we didn't make as much money because we didn't control the international markets. So it's the thing that allowed us to make the movie was ultimately a disappointment to the mothership in a way that none of us could have foreseen. It's the thing that kept us alive, but it was also the thing that I think ultimately was the mortal wound for the company. The green light process was such that it was time for a big swing at that company, and everybody knew it. And Peter, and we talked about this a lot, and it is a lesson that is important for people that are raising money for companies, is raising money for art, raising money for movies, raising money. He, because of the work he had done at Miramax, came in with a proof of concept that made us all understand that he knew how he was going to execute on the vision of what he was asking the money for which he was asking the money. And that's, as we all know, as investors on this call now, when you have somebody that walks in and that really knows what they want to do and how they want to achieve it and has the roadmap to get there, there's a real level of comfort there. So we can't underestimate Peter's preparation. And we did benefit from the work that was invested by Miramax.
And I didn't know that Peter was such an advocate and really a believer in the driving force behind Lord of the Rings. I thought he was brought in simply as a talented director. Mark, if you could maybe talk a little bit about, from that perspective, New Line Cinema is going to commit a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of your time, effectively half a decade. You had to put a lot of trust in someone who we now look at Peter as being a star director, but that wasn't quite the point necessarily leading into Lord of the Rings that would make him a star. What made you confident that this was a bet worth taking?
It was a couple of things. I mean, there were a number of things that were very personal to me. One, I had been obsessed with the books, The Lord of the Rings, since I had been 12 years old. I had been a Dungeons and Dragons playing fanatic. I still play Dungeons and Dragons with the same group of people I played in the late 70s. And I had become passionate about Peter as a filmmaker 10, 12 years before. So the project was essentially these 3 or 4 passion points all converging at the same time. So to me, even though the risk, I knew objectively the risk was large, but from a personal perspective, I was highly confident because I just felt like I knew more than everybody else. And the fact that I knew more, I was able to transmit that confidence to key stakeholders within New Line and our foreign partners. And again, Jane's 100% right. The pitch materials that Peter brought in, essentially, he did the classic salesman, tool where he basically asked, what are the 4 scary questions I'm going to get asked that could knock the whole project over? And I'm going to anticipate them, answer them in advance before they're even asked. And it was really, really smart. So in a weird sort of way, the timing was right. For me personally, the company I was working at wanted the projects like these at that moment. So, and in terms of the time commitment, I mean, I didn't really see it as something so long because every day on it was a gift. I mean, even though it was the hardest thing I've done in my life so far, and there were days that were incredibly challenging, I wouldn't trade the worst day on Lord of the Rings for anything.
By the time it got greenlit, I'm assuming that was sometime in the mid to late 90s, to the time that ground was broken in New Zealand, was that about a 3 or 4 year window or sooner?
It was more like 18 months. We made the conceptual decision in July, August of 1998. Cameras rolled in October of 99. And so what was great about that is that in that time, a lot of people have read this, but like the place where we created the Shire, we planted all those plants, a year beforehand, because the Shire had to look organic and grown. It couldn't look like a movie set. So all these things were done, painstaking details that were done at a very, very high level. And we should talk about New Zealand as well, because there was benefits of New Zealand. That's where Peter Jackson's muse is. But it's also, there were government, there were tax breaks and rebates there. There were crew rates and economies of scale there that made that actually the perfect place to movie, both creatively and from a business perspective.
And there was innovation because of the necessity of being on an island, forced not only the movie to draw talent from different pockets than you would normally draw from, like farmers and people that worked the earth, and those people came up with a lot of really great solutions to things that are still being done in the movies, which is always an exciting thing. So Mark, do you want to talk about the chainmail, which I always love?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big challenges was, how are we going to have chainmail that weighs down actors, is dangerous and hot? And all these farm kids realized you could cut up PVC pipe, because they all worked with irrigation pipe all the time. And they came up with this electrolyte kind of spray that the camera would perceive it as metal. And it was very, very light. And they just made these little mechanized guillotines that would chop the PVC pipe. And the other gigantic technical innovation was this software that was created in New Zealand called Massive, which was the way you were able to have 100,000 orcs and elves. It was basically an artificially intelligent mass army generator, which would create these tiny, independently intelligent digital creatures that you could dress with skin and bones and armor and costume, and send them at each other, and they would act organically. They didn't have to be individually programmed, or they weren't programmed in blocks, like, in a lot of movies where everyone moves in a block. These were all moving individually. So when the camera sweeps over battlefields, you see people acting in an incredibly organic way. It's unconscious, but when you take it in, it has a huge effect.
And I would have assumed the advantage to being patient and maybe getting rejected years earlier is probably the technology to make it most impactful just wasn't there, maybe even in the mid-90s.
Yeah, no, Jane and I find over and over again that as frustrating as it gets when we don't achieve something on the time frame we want to achieve it on, inevitably one finds that things find their level. They find their financial level quite often, and they find their moment in time. And quite often, if you think about it later, you realize it happened when it was supposed to happen.
And Peter really was a visionary.
Yeah.
And not every, we'll say not every filmmaker is a visionary, but Peter actually, I love this story too, is that he bought a paint factory in Wellington well before anybody dreamt of doing Lord of the Rings, because he knew he needed a place that big in order to make the movie happen. So he, with his own money, risked to have his vision come true.
Right.
And I think that he also just pushed people constantly to be better and to think differently. And you know, he is continuing to do that. I mean, some of the stuff, I don't know if anybody saw the World War I documentary where he colorized and synced World War I footage, but it's jaw-droppingly impactful. And I know he's following it up with a exciting project that will be on Disney Plus soon.
For sure. Given that it went from kind of green light to breaking ground in 18 months for such a big, 3-film commitment, I'm assuming you had to move really quick as an organization in terms of the actors and who's going to be involved and who's going to turn it down. And some people that would probably love to do it, but then when they heard the commitment of the number of years, that sounds like that happened incredibly quick. It must have took a Herculean effort behind the scenes.
We were really fortunate that there was a thought about star casting in the traditional sense on the movies, and the feeling was that if the stars got too big on it, it would pierce the sort of the vision, because you wouldn't be looking at Gandalf, you'd be looking at the giant movie star. So we were able to find people who were so perfect for the roles, and yet we're prepared to make the commitment. But yeah, there were people, some of the people that were run of show. I mean, the film's essentially shot for over 400 days in 5 shooting blocks, because it was essentially shot like one gigantic 11-hour movie. Obviously the schedule was front loaded with film 1 material, but generally speaking, it was shot like a giant single movie. So it made for some very big commitments for people.
I mean, I use a lot of sports analogies because it's what I know. In a sports franchise, say an NFL team, you have the owner, you have the general manager, and you have the coach. And yes, something called the players as well. That kind of relates a little bit to your industry in terms of with New Line Cinema, with the executive directors, with Peter, with the actors. Does it help if people have very defined roles? And I hate to say they stick in them because maybe they would offer insight to others that could be valuable. But how do you respect people's boundaries, their egos, yet have open dialogue to make things better than what it may be if you were all just individually siloed?
Right. I mean, every movie is different. So they all organize themselves differently. Most movies, because there are certain skills and crafts involved in different departments, people have to operate reasonably within their sphere in order for things to get done. But a lot of, in the case of someone like Peter, where the best idea really does win, there's opportunity for people to make contributions from all kinds of different areas, which is great. Not everyone has the security to be that open as Peter is.
Yeah, and I think that, I always compare being on a movie set to a military operation. There is a chain of command, and it does need to be adhered to, or else there's chaos. And Mark and we're very soft touch producers. We're not very heavy handed. We don't scream at people. But the only times where I've ever had to yell at somebody is when somebody's broken rank, because it can become very. It can become very unmooring for the crew when you have a plan and this is what you've set out doing. And if people just break rank or break schedule or just decide on whim that they want to do something, it's very, very hard to keep that many people, hundreds of people, aiming in the same direction in the short time frame that you're together. I think that lesson, in terms of companies and company culture, it's very relevant. They're very similar. You do want, you want to cut down on politics as much as possible. It doesn't mean that people can't be imaginative and creative, but if your boss has set a vision and a way that you're going to do stuff, it's important to fall in and let their bosses have issues with it. I think, Mark, does that
totally
sum it up? Yeah, it is very much a military operation.
And that applies, in my experience, with successful businesses as well. Mm-hmm. Jane, a question for you, going back a little bit to the math and numbers, since people are interested from kind of that perspective and investing. Going back to the time where it was greenlit, late 1990s, the commitment to do 3 of them for an organization that never did something above 14 million before. Was this hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, or even more than that?
Well, we had worked our way up. So we had
from
started
92, correct.
Yeah,
yes.
But from 92, we had worked our way up. I think that, but it was a big jump. I think that probably before that, like the highest budget we had done, I think Mark was around 40 something.
Yes, 40.
And at Greenlight, and I don't think this is indiscreet, at Greenlight, I think we were looking at each movie was about 90 million. So it was 100 and, is that right? 270 million?
It's public information. The films were ultimately, by the time everything was worked out, the going in Greenlight budget was around 210 million for 3 films, which is sort of funny when you think about it now, because that's 210 million for 3 films as opposed to 1 film, which often happens, in the current.
And if you take that 210 million and you realize that you've, let's say, offset half of it through international, we also had output deals with television. So once we released a movie into the theaters, really the most amount of money we made was home entertainment and television. And so we would run numbers by looking at sort of box office ranges. And if the movie does, 60 million at the box office, we've spent a certain amount to get that. What happens through all the other distribution revenue chains, and we would run numbers across, and we felt pretty confident. Rings was sort of a funny one to look at because it was either going to work and all 3 were going to work, or the first one's going to fail. And we were just that it was a big swing for that reason. But gratefully now we can talk about it. It all worked out. I don't know, but it was calculated risk. We talked a lot about at New Line, Bob and Michael had a saying, they called it prudent aggression. And the idea was you needed to take swings, and the Mark always likes to say, the bat's meant for swinging. And then you did everything you could to minimize your risk so that you were being smart about it. But it didn't, Rings, you couldn't get out of the fact that it had that first one failed. It was probably the end of it. And there's something really, clarifying about that as a company. Talk about vision. Everybody had really shared vision for that.
Successful. And how did the $210 million plus for, again, a studio that was way bigger than what they've done, let our audience into a little bit of behind the scenes? Do they go to big banks and get financing, or could ultra high net worth investors potentially come into something like that?
Well, no, we couldn't have brought in new investors. At that point, we were part of the Time Warner family. So when New Line, when I joined in 92, we were an independent company. It's just New Line. Then in 95, Ted Turner bought New Line. And we became part of the Turner family. And Ted was a huge fan of how we approached the business, and we were his movie people, and he loved us. And then I actually will never forget it. We were looking at potentially buying a theater chain, and I put together my little presentation. I was going to present it to the Turner board, and that day, Time Warner and Turner merged, which was an exciting day. So by the time we made Rings, we were part of that conglomerate, and so New Line had an operating budget. This was within the operating budget and within their discretion. So it was their bet to make.
Well, kudos to both of you. We're going to move on from Lord of the Rings, which we could go on for hours. It's one of the greatest movies, even individually, but certainly as a collective. And kudos to both of you to being so integral behind the scenes and bringing it to the world. So we owe you a debt of gratitude. And Mark, you were, I guess, a couple of years before that in 1996. I believe you were, of course, New Line, but you specifically were kind of charged with bringing someone from Asia to come to America and help. Now, his own personality and skill, of course, but make him a star. We now know him so well as Jackie Chan. If you could talk a little bit about Jackie and how he became such a star.
Sure. I mean, the Jackie Chan, the deal for Rumble in the Bronx, which is the film that we acquired that started that whole thing. I mean, I was personally a big Jackie Chan fan, and I'd seen a lot of his Hong Kong films, but he was routinely making these Hong Kong films. But this one was different because it was, even though it was shot in Vancouver, it was set in New York. And I saw it and with a number of my New Line colleagues, and it just felt like the kind of movie that could cut through the clutter. And I remember, this is the benefit of working with the same group of people over a span of years. I remembered, in the 70s that Bob Shea, the founder of New Line, had tried and failed to acquire some seminal Bruce Lee movies, and he had lost out to a competitor who wasn't even in the business anymore. Like Bob had outlasted him. So I remember calling Bob in New York and saying, hey, we missed out on Bruce Lee, but Jackie Chan is here, and this is a terrific film, and we should, there was no expectation that the film would then launch into the Rush Hour franchise. That's one of the benefits, because we acquired the film. It was successful. It was essentially the second coming of Jackie Chan, because he had come to the US in the 80s and done a number of films that he wasn't totally thrilled with. So the fact that he came back with this film, which was a hit, and then was able to leverage that into a New Line franchise with like Rush Hour with Chris Tucker and Brett Ratner, that was the system working perfectly.
Is it, we are getting a question in from one of our live participants, and she's asking effectively, Mark, is it true that Jackie Chan didn't speak a lick of English?
No, he spoke English. When we first met him in 1996, he spoke. I came to know that he spoke better English than he allowed me to think he spoke in the beginning. But he did speak it. In fact, when we ended up making the decision to dub the film in English, he dubbed his entire performance in English. So he did.
Wow. Let me change the subject. It's going to be of great interest to me, and I hope our audience. So we'll get to the COVID aspect of it shortly. But broadly, Hollywood, the dominant community for quote unquote movies. It's not even close. And even to this day, you say Hollywood, it's synonymous. You know what it is. However, probably going back about 20 years ago, but more forcefully in the last 10 or 15 years, there's some new dynamics occurring. And we're seeing it in all industries, led by effectively advancements in technology, what we broadly define as Silicon Valley, and the rise of Netflix from, technically 20 plus years ago, but especially over the last 10 years. And now you have the announcement of Google TV. Hollywood, obviously, like every industry, needs to adapt and reinvent. If you could talk a little bit about the dynamic of change that's occurring.
Sure.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of in the DNA of our company, actually, and we didn't realize how omniscient we were. And so what I'll tell you, it'll sound very self-serving, but when we started the company, so New Line got subsumed into Warner Brothers, and Mark and I had always talked about having a company together. And we decided to do it. And we sat down to figure out what the company was. What did we want to be? And we looked at the landscape of what was happening, and you could see little cracks in the studio system, but it was not obviously as insane as it is now. But we said, you know what, content will continue to be king, but we want to be distribution agnostic. We don't want to be dependent upon our relationship with Warner Brothers or Universal or Sony or Disney. We want to be distribution agnostic. We want to be providers of high quality content with high quality content creators. We want to be medium agnostic, meaning television, feature films, live performance, across the board, anything that's story driven. And we wanted to be budget agnostic, and we wanted to be genre agnostic. So that was different thinking. It seems really obvious now, but it was very different thinking than what our peers would have done in the same period of time. Because what was common when you became a producer, you either picked one genre, like you're going to be, the young adult producers, and everybody sends you all the young adult stuff, or you're going to be just big budget people, or you're going to go get a producing deal with just Warner Brothers and only make stuff for them. And we really decided we didn't want to do that. And we're really obviously grateful now, because we actually giggled to ourselves the other day that of all of our projects that are sort of bubbling up and the most likely to happen, most of the companies we're working for didn't exist when we started the company. They didn't even exist. So Mark, do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, so exactly. So as we started executing, independent features and television, these companies came into existence, obviously the streamers, Netflix and Amazon and Hulu, and now even more. And we found, because we had been executing independent content, not only did we have material to take to these players, but they were looking for seasoned producers, operators, people that they needed content on such scale and they didn't want to build a giant infrastructure where they have, 50 executives managing all these people. So we got put into the mix at Netflix relatively early. They wanted us to do a sort of a tween young adult high school movie, which is a genre we never thought we would do. As it happened, there was a script they already liked, and they just needed seasoned hands. And this is where you find it really quickly in terms of scaling a business. So there was stuff that we were developing, and now people were saying, we will utilize you just for your expertise on stuff we need made. And suddenly the business just transforms when those sorts of things happen.
And then just, at a very much higher level, if you look at the changes in the distribution landscape, they are profound. The traditional studios are bending to the will of the streamer, not vice versa.
Right.
It is going to be imperative for the studios to find a streaming strategy. Many of them have decided to create their own. And then others, like Paramount or Sony, are going to have to rely on the streamers that already exist. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens. Obviously, there's a gigantic investment in content right now, because I don't know, to really age myself, if you go back to the VHS and the Betamax, VHS, which was a less quality technology, worked better because it had more content. It had content that people wanted to see.
Of course.
So I think that we are in an arms race right now, which is of great benefit to Mark and I if we can capitalize on it. And I do think there will be winners and there will be losers. I think the real question from a consumer behavior perspective is, how many subscriptions will the average family be able to afford? And if it's a family, if you figure Disney is one of them because they want to get all of the stuff for their kids, then if there's only room for 3, what are the next 2? And I think everybody's fighting for that second position.
Yeah, like you said, I guess there will be winners and losers. It's a little out of left field, but it kind of ties in to how people are absorbing content, and effectively the rise with social media in the last 12 or 13 years of the influencer. So you look at TikTok, Charlie D'Amelio has 87 million, came from nowhere, followers. She's number 1, by the way, on TikTok, and it's PewDiePie. Yes, I have a teenage son, so I know who he is. On YouTube, with probably about 110 million followers. Just think of the influence that them and others have. One, they could probably act and be in a movie. It's almost guaranteed on some level to be profitable, or they could be tremendous promotional distribution arms. How has that dynamic changed, and how is that evolving?
Well, it's interesting. It hasn't, a few people did try to do the movies with the influencers, and they did fine. I think that they probably, made their money back, but it was not as big an experience as you would imagine. Really, what's going to start happening is a merger of all that's good in Hollywood at the high level, and then all that, the most talented of the influencer will cross section into it. So, for instance, Lore DIY, who is a big DIY influencer, now is in her second season of a craft show for HBO Max. So she's continuing to do her influencing, but she's now crossing into a bigger platform using the bullhorn of Warner's. So I think that you're going to start seeing that. And then I think, really, if you look at the influencers, if you look at Twitch and gaming, the biggest impact is that we're bifurcating time, really, that we are losing that audience. Your son's generation is less interested in going to a movie theater, maybe even less interested in watching movies at all than they are at watching the content that they like. So there's just more competition for eyeballs. I still think Mark and I, we agree on this. There will still be room for the big event movies, the movies that you must go to the theater to see, or rent at a huge amount, like Mulan. I think that Disney probably did quite well with their pricing strategy on Mulan. There are going to always be those movies. And there's always going to be groundbreaking television, like long series content. And then there's going to be all this other stuff that we have to compete with. So I think the quality of content needs to go up. Mark?
Totally agree.
Yeah, and you had a good point there with people like my son, who's 17, by the way, relatively a newer 17. He does like Netflix. There's a couple of shows. Who doesn't like Breaking Bad? I mean, that's like our favorite family show. Nothing like a drug show to be a good family show. But it does follow kind of a Shakespearean path relative to started off with relatively kind of good intentions and unfortunately goes down a very, very bad path. But you're correct. I just don't see him and his peers the way from a generation ago, let alone 2 or 3. It's completely different. Would you say that Court 5, one of the services that your organization is providing both to the industry and those outside the industry, to investors, to creators, to like everyone, is guidance and advice, because we're in a new world coupled with COVID. Now it's even more complicated than ever before.
Yeah, Mark, do you want to?
Right, that's primarily what we do, even when it lacks those labels. I mean, there are things we do that is explicitly that. People who have content that they want to see made for a range of financial or personal reasons, who don't want to have a bad or don't want to have the wrong experience in traditional Hollywood, and then they join forces with us to be their guides and shepherds through that process. But really anything, even when you're dealing with people who work in Los Angeles every day, essentially what you're doing as a producer is helping to inform and guide and advocate for whether it's for artists, business people. That's really that's the heart of what the whole game is.
And what we have done is capitalize on our experience. We've been hired to look at some studios, some actual physical studio space, both here and abroad. We've been hired. Yeah, you develop not only a huge amount of experience after 30 years in a business, but also a pretty legitimate contact list of people that you can call upon. So we've walked, people from different countries into the studio space. We've helped private investors look at the potential of actual physical studio space. We've both here and overseas. And we have, as Mark said, helped people that either want to invest in something and aren't sure if they should, or know they want to invest in it and they want somebody that they can trust to walk them down the road.
We're going to come a little bit back to kind of for families to be impactful, to be an investor. And I kind of hinted early, maybe even for a social impact in a little while. I'd be very remiss not to bring up, and building upon some of the issues that we've been talking about, effectively the impact of COVID-19 from so many different perspectives, from a capacity of movie and TV shows being made to limitations on location, to what happens if one person gets COVID and things get shut down. I don't know, 3 days, 5 days, 2 weeks. So we're about, 6.5 months in now. From that perspective, there's several others I'm going to get to, but from that perspective, what's been the impact of COVID?
Well, I mean, it was existential in March. Mark and I personally had both a film and a television series that were greenlit, ready to go. We were supposed to be shooting them in June and July. Obviously, that screeched to a halt. We are the lucky ones. Our financiers have not abandoned the projects, but they are delayed. The television show we are in the midst of starting to make, and the feature film we'll make next June. The COVID impact on actually making stuff is, at least as we sit here right now, it is a added expense to the bottom line. All of the unions and everybody has weighed in on sort of what needs to happen, and it is substantial, and it's right. It will keep people safe, but there's quite a substantial add-on to the budgets of all of these things. So what we're seeing, at least initially, is that the things that are getting made are out of very deep-pocketed multinationals, mostly. Our feature film that we're shooting next June is an independent movie, but it is being financed by a very well-capitalized international company. As far as independent film, which a lot of, I'm sure your families get offered, will you come in and make a little investment in independent film? We'll say this, COVID or no COVID, the only reason to invest in an independent movie is because you love the people making it, or you love the message, or you just want to have fun. Sort of the way you go to Vegas, right? You either go to Vegas to see a show, or you go because you like gambling, or you just are going with your girlfriends and want to have fun. Making independent features is a little like that. And we've successfully raised independent money for independent features. And I think if you talk to any one of our investors, they all had a great time. One of the films we made, we still write checks. One of the films we unfortunately lost their money, but not all of it. I think made 3/4 of their money back. But you really, as a profile, you want to be an investor that can, you can miss the money. The fun part about independent film is that if it works, really works, and you get a Blair Witch Project, not only is it extraordinarily fun to win that way, but you can make a huge return on your investment. So, but it's a high risk, high reward type thing. Mark, do you want to talk about sort of the business getting back to work?
You mean in terms of people getting back to the work of production?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of like Jane intimated. I mean, people that we work with and know are literally, productions are just now starting again. And so these are kind of the canaries in the mine that have the safety protocols, that are doing them, that have added the money to the budget. So, if we end up making this TV show at the end of the year, which is what we intend to do, we'll be among that first vanguard. And, everyone's excited to do it, but so everyone wants to get back to work, but everyone's mindful of the risks. So, but you got to figure some version of this virus is going to be with us into a portion of next year. Whether you believe a little of it or a lot of it is a separate issue. So it's good to do this and figure out what the processes are.
And people have already gone in front of us, right? So Batman is shooting. Robert Pattinson came down with the illness. They had to shut down for 3 weeks. Now that's something that Warner Brothers can handle, right? That's not something an independently financed film could handle. The biggest sort of thing that needs to be worked out for independent cinema to get going is insurance. And people are sort of, they're circling, but nobody's totally willing to be first man to insure a movie with COVID. So the studios are taking their own risk because they need content, and they know that it's worth the risk.
Yeah.
And you did mention it earlier, but staying on the COVID theme, but also this, I mean, it's devastating for movie theater owners. And yes, some of them are gigantic companies and they're being crushed. It's a really, really a bad time. If you go by 70% of the population likely needs to have the vaccine, and estimates of when the vaccine could be mass distributed, we're probably potentially talking 8 to 14 months before that could occur. There will be, I mean, it's sad, just like there's restaurants and small businesses, unfortunately, I'm just going to be honest, I see it in New York. They're not going to come back. for sure, there'll be the distribution channels traditionally for the studios are, and I don't know, even when things are normal, if it will be a new normal, and maybe movie theaters just are a little bit of a relic. I know that's terrible to say, but you did mention, there still is streaming. There's new ways. They're going to have to adapt because the consumer's adapting. Then you look at the number of young millennials. Generation Z is a huge population. They're coming into a level of going to college, of influence, entering to the workforce. They're 100% mobile. They're going to change the dynamic of the whole industry. But again, that's part of, I guess, the consulting that you do at Court 5.
Look, the theatrical experience was already under threat because really the things that were being made for theatrical marketplace are very big, huge investment stuff. I'm a believer. It's a shame to me because I actually think if people were willing to invest in the theaters, like sitting in a movie theater is a lot safer than some of the things that people are allowed to do right now. And if you social distance seats and put up plexiglass, I think that there is a way to design a movie theater that I would feel comfortable going to. But I think that just takes capital, and whether people are willing to risk the capital now to provide a new experience of theatrical experience, I don't know. I think people will still like to go to the big movies in the theatrical experience, but I think it will be sort of like going to Disney World. It maybe the ticket price will go up. So that they're going to be showing less, but the payoff for the theater owners will be more because the ticket price will go up. I do think a lot more stuff will be streamed. I think that if we look at, it just kind of depends, right? So Netflix they only care about subscribers. They care about getting new subscribers, and they care about keeping the subscribers they have to reduce the churn. So they do these big movies, The Irishman, to get new people in. And then they do movies like we did, which was called Reality High, which is to keep families happy. If you look at Disney Plus, they needed to get even more subscribers in. So the decision to give Hamilton into Disney Plus for free, I imagine served them well.
Yeah.
Mark,
totally.
Do you agree?
Yeah.
Once people have a critical mass of subscribers, it'll be interesting to see what that value equation is of whether they go to theaters or go to streaming or do both, because maybe it's going to be that you're going to have fewer theaters that are going to cost more to go, but people are going to want to do it because of the communal nature of it. But I think, it'll just be interesting to see who survives. I'm a big believer all that's old is new again. Just like vinyl has come back. I think there will be a desire for communal experiences. The experience economy was the fastest growing part of the entertainment business. So I have to believe that going and sitting in a theater with popcorn will work. But Mark was actually at USC a couple months ago, and I don't think any of the kids had gone to a movie. And this was before COVID.
No, exactly. And it was a generational thing. I mean, really what we're in the midst of, it's tempting in an era of like looking at things by quarters and by annuals. We're really in an evolution. And you almost have to look at things on a longer timeline, to keep your blood pressure from completely like going crazy. And also to try to think creatively about how to look at opportunity. Because if you're just trying to hang on like, okay, by third quarter next year, the theaters will be open. Really? I mean, they might be, but is that even the right question? Like, maybe it's better to pull back and think even bigger.
For sure. We're getting some questions in from our live participants today. One of them, a little bit on the COVID theme. So besides the production changes with COVID, she asked, what storylines do you see being incorporated?
That's so fun because we're out with a TV project really this week, apart from being a great project based on a best-selling book, is that it's a science fiction piece where it's predominantly around a main character, and it's really about this main character, and it's mostly set in virtual. The character is cryogenically frozen and wakes up in the future without a body. He's been turned into artificial intelligence. So that's the central conceit. And we realized we didn't develop it for that reason, but now suddenly it's super COVID friendly by its very nature. So
COVID friendly is the new catchphrase for certain types of content that can still be made without endangering a bunch of people.
Right.
I think what we will see, you know, we have a television show we're developing right now. In a pre-COVID world, we would have probably had a few hundred extras, and they would have come and gone. Like they would have just, some people would show up one day and they'd work. In a COVID production strategy, you can't do that. You really need to bring them in, and they need to be with you for the whole show. Right. And so what we're going to do, since it's a fantasy adjacent piece, we're going to reuse people. And we're going to use our crew. We're going to, you know, for extras, we'll put our crew in costumes and they'll be background players. And again, you know, the power of the camera, we'll shoot in a certain way. We'll shoot a little tighter so it feels busier, but it will affect the content that's coming out. And I think we'll really notice it in about a year, the impact of COVID. I know a lot of people are doing sort of the gimmicky Zoom shows. Right. We'll see whether those work. I have no interest as a consumer in watching that because I'm on Zoom all day.
Tell me about it. Is the social justice environment going on now? Someone asked, do you see a big push for, and it basically leads into my next question I was going to ask you, for diversity?
Yeah. You know, I mean, and Angelo knows this. I spent the last 25 years of my life fighting for gender equality, both in front and behind the camera. And there's an intersectionality with people of color, obviously, because we can't have just one race of women actually have equality in this business. So the good news is that that parts of Hollywood have been thinking about this for a long time. And the bad news is a lot of others haven't. I have found that once a lesson settles in the brains of the power brokers in Hollywood, that they actually do start making change. So when the Me Too thing happened, even though we had been fighting for gender equality for a long time, I had several men, and very powerful men, call me almost choked up because they hadn't seen it. And they asked what they could do. And I said, hire women. Because it's proven that when you have a more diverse representation at the decision-making table, then the content is infused with more representation. It's just the case because people think about it differently. And that is happening for sure with people of color. It had already started, but it is definitely accelerating because I think that we in Hollywood all know that what you see, you can be what you see. And if you see a woman, even if she's a mad scientist, or you see a person of color be the president, our media matters, and the messaging and who you see on screen really matters. And so I'm grateful. I feel that our peers have finally heard the call of this. And it's just good business. It's just good business.
Yeah, I mean, well said. And I was going to ask you about the Me Too and women in the industry, and you certainly answer that. And I mean, I remember Barack Obama saying that, if I remember the story correctly, that the actor Dennis Haysbert, who was the president in the series 24, until he wasn't, he died, was a little bit, 1% kind of inspirational to him.
Sure.
So what Hollywood, and I'm using that very loosely, what Hollywood presents to the public sometimes impacts how people think and the decisions that they make.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it influences so many things. It influences the books we read. It influences the clothes we buy and how we present. And I do think that Hollywood has realized that its own backyard needed work. And I think that if it cleans up its act and has more representation and decision making and storytellers, that if people are telling, if you are a Black director and you're telling a Black story, that it's for people by the people. And I think it really it makes a difference. And we've seen incredible content come out, whether it's Wonder Woman or Black Panther or it's Moonlight or, that is distinct content, or the show Rami. There's just so many sort of pockets of creativity that have been locked away for too long. And I think that we're seeing a real renaissance of content that I hope will make people more tolerant in the world.
And it may be a rambling question, which is something that I'm pretty used to doing. But back to the rise of Generation Z, how big they are, and I'm living it here in my home, and knowing a lot of the children or grandchildren of my members and relationships. How they interact with movies, you think because they have super short attention spans that would actually be better than series. And maybe it's COVID, maybe it's Netflix, but a lot of them, they love series. So they're able to commit, whether it's binge watching, and some of the all-time greats from about 12 to 15 years ago are, I mentioned one in Breaking Bad, The Wire, a little before that, or at least in that range, Sopranos, are making a tremendous comeback during COVID because people need content to watch, and wonderful writing, production, and acting is kind of timeless, isn't it?
Mark, you have a good response.
I think it makes complete sense to me, though, that would be the case, because if you're generally consuming things that are very short form, because it's texting, it's TikTok, these are things you do with your friends, just to plug into something that's long. We had a meeting with a big and storied executive here in town who basically doesn't even use the term movies and TV anymore. He basically said, I'm in the content business. I'm either in the long form business, which he means, the story either breaks apart into, 10 hours, over 10 episodes, or it's a 2-hour movie, which might have sequels, but he doesn't even separate his movie. He doesn't have movie and TV executives. He just has a content team. And I think that goes to the point that, And
I think also, Angela, like you are right, great stories never die. And we obviously, the great literature, that we all grew up having to read in school is still great literature, even though much of it was written hundreds of years ago. And I think that film is similar. And I get very excited by the streamers because they're starting to sort of take stuff off shelves and make it available to people in a different way. And I'll just end with a little anecdote. We tend to do these little tours where we go and meet with private equity people and venture capitalists, and just to find out what's going on, what's the next thing. And somebody was talking about Twitch, and they said that they had some statistics that showed that the most popular show on Twitch was the Mr. Rogers documentary.
Wow.
And that right.
I never would have guessed that.
Yeah, I know. So we had the exact same reaction. And
it was a great movie, though.
Right. So we didn't know why that is, but for some reason that they stopped down from playing games to watch something about Mr. Rogers. And this was the documentary. It wasn't even the movie. So I think we don't know. I think Mark's right. And I think that, for anybody that's investing in it or actually doing it, I think that, you have to believe in the stories that you're telling and feel like that there's a reason why we're making them, and then hope they find their audience.
Yeah.
And we're getting a question in. What new formats do you see happening with new modes of consuming content, like Quibi being a vertical format?
It's funny. We watched the Quibi experiment with interest. They threw a lot. They threw a lot of money to people to make sort of Hollywood budgeted short form content. We were watching it interestingly because we had met with very early days at YouTube. We had met with one of the top people at YouTube, and they basically said, the kids don't want fancy content. They want to discover people, and they don't want your fancy content. And so, it was a short meeting is really what and I think he might have been right. I think that there is something about the short form experience that might not be suited to big Hollywood stars. I think that there's an authenticity to short form content that is the thing that the kids are connecting with. And the idea that you're like me, you're talking to me. And I wonder, I mean, we'll see what happens with Quibi, but I do wonder about their numbers and whether or not it felt like we were trying to put sort of Hollywood's idea of what was good on an audience that knows what they think is good. That makes sense. So I don't know what's going to happen with short form. I think that short form is always going to be probably the most authentic person to person format. And I think celebrities, it doesn't mean celebrities can't advantage themselves of that.
Sure.
But it needs to come from the celebrity, not from their PR agent and writers. It needs to be more natural.
And you already mentioned, and very honestly, that investing specifically in independent movies is a tremendous amount of risk and tremendous odds that 9 out of 10 times, perhaps more, that at best you'll break even, you'll probably actually lose money. But there are some people, I remember watching, I'm not going to mention what it is, but about 6 months ago, and at the ending credits, I saw one of the relationships I know as an executive producer.
Sure.
And I know that he's active in socially responsible issues. And I'm assuming he's doing that from the perspective of he could afford to. It's probably not profitable, but it's valuable to support certain issues. And we spoke about that earlier. A movie, a show is seen by many people around the world. It helps to get a message across.
Yeah, you know, we met with, I'm going to try to keep her anonymous, but we met with one of the leading investors in documentaries.
Right.
And she's put together a consortium of investors, high net worth individuals, to invest in documentaries. And some of the most recent Oscar-winning documentaries have kind of come out of that. And she said that, you know, her investors do not expect, nor do they care if these movies turn a profit. They really are doing it for the social cause of it. They do get to choose which social cause and which story they get involved in. And I think that there's, you know, this is, again, we work in a business with a powerful megaphone. And content is, you know, it is the way to change hearts and minds and to really impact social change. And I know that, you know, having been involved in trying to create systemic change, they've proven out that when media is always it's the thing that breaks the door, and then politics can follow. And if you look at the issue of gay marriage and you know, gay rights, that has been absolutely the case. That, you know, when with Ellen coming out and doing her show, and then all of the content that made people feel, you know, Will and Grace, you know, that, oh, you know, I know. Like, even if they didn't know anybody that was gay, they knew somebody that was gay on the television, and that changed. And so legislation follows that perspective shift. And so I do believe in the power of it. And I do believe that, you know, if you look at Laureen Jobs has invested an enormous amount in content, all with social messaging. So.
Yeah, and to me, a little bit of that goes back, about 16, 17 years ago to Inconvenient Truth. And that seemed to, that kind of spurred that model, which was very effective, bringing to bear climate change, which were still a tremendous amount of issues around. So maybe it didn't have the impact I was hoping it would have, but actually, in many ways, I'm sure it did. It might even be worse now if it wasn't for that. We just don't think of it from that perspective. We're getting, I guess, kind of a final question in. I think we kind of answered it, but I guess I'm going to ask it anyway. Is the industry, are you exploring, exposed to alternative ways of filming due to the coronavirus restrictions related to the challenges of insurance and otherwise? But you did mention before, there's been some attempts at doing kind of Zoom-centric shows, which probably don't appear to be doing too well.
Well, we'll see. I mean, some of the good storytellers, I know that Genji Cohen, who's responsible for shows like Orange is the New Black,
Sure.
and is it Weeds? Weeds, yeah.
Yeah.
So she's responsible for those two shows. She's an amazing storyteller. She's done one of these shows. So I think we'll see how they turn out. I think there's a goal of Hollywood at large to get back to traditional filming, but Mark and I will say it over and over again. These are the moments where somebody comes out and does something massively creative, and every 98% of us go, "Oh my God, why didn't we think of that?"
Yeah, after the fact, hindsight.
And people have done that, whether it's Kubrick in The Shining, creating the Steadicam because he just wanted that shot. I think that people come up with stuff, and so I expect that we will see all sorts of experiments, and some of them may stick. So it's exciting. Mark and I are too deep into this business to quit. So we're excited to see what the next chapter is going to look like.
I know what that's like, to burn bridges, and all you got is what you do and you love it, and you'll find a way to reinvent yourself and make it work.
Exactly.
For those that would like to learn more about Court 5 and connect perhaps with your website, maybe your emails, Jane and Mark, how could they do that?
Well, we have a website, which is court5.com. We're very stalkable. We're also on IMDb Pro. And my Twitter, Instagram handle is at Harvey Fleming, which is a little, and Mark's is at Mark Ordesky.
Yeah, that's the advantage.
And if you find one of us, you find both of us.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, excellent. It's been fantastic. And giving a little bit of my close, it's been tremendous having Mark and Jane on. Again, it's a little bit of a different subject than I guess what people would look at from a family office organization, but we like to stretch the envelope a little bit and then bring it somewhat into how families could be impactful as well. And simply, I was just curious from so many different perspectives, being a fan of Lord of the Rings and Jackie Chan, I might add. So it was really great to hear some of the stories, but also hearing from my perspective how the business is evolving. And that's unique about COVID to businesses and family offices. What was going to happen is being accelerated. And some of the reinvention we're going through was probably needed, and some of it could be good. I know it's suffering leading into that, but it'll be intriguing how this kind of plays out. Everyone, I'm Angelo Robles. I'm the host of the Angelo Robles Podcast, and I'm the founder and CEO at Family Office Association, a global membership organization dedicated to families of wealth and their family offices, providing unique proprietary content, hosting masterclasses, and over 200 digital programs during COVID-19. We've been incredibly active. Our website is familyofficeassociation.com. I'm very active on social media. My YouTube, it's a little smaller than PewDiePie's, but it simply is Family Office. I got that great name back in like 2008, for what I do, at least a great name. And I'm Family Office Association on Instagram, and my direct email is angelo@familyofficeassociation.com. Mark and Jane, thank you so much. Thank you.
It was our pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Thanks.